Hi students, welcome to Pharmd group. Today we will discuss about scope of anatomy and physiology, basic terms used in this subject. All right everyone, let's start from the beginning. The foundation of all medical and health sciences, anatomy and physiology. If you have just joined the Pharmd course, this is going to be one of your most important subjects because before you can understand how a medicine works, you first need to know how the human body is built and how it functions. That's exactly what anatomy and physiology helps us do. Now, what is anatomy? Anatomy is the science that deals with the structure of the human body, what parts it has, how they arranged, how they are connected. The word anatomy actually comes from the Greek word anatome, which means cutting up. In olden times, people learned anatomy by actually dissecting the dead bodies to see what was inside. Now there is another word, dissection. Dissection is just the technique of cutting open a body to study its parts, while anatomy is the whole science that includes everything we learn about the body, even using microscopes, x-rays and imaging techniques. Example, think of anatomy like studying a car design. You look at the engine, wheels, wiring, all the parts and how they fit together. That's anatomy. What about physiology? Physiology is nothing but learning about functioning of the car, like how fuel moves, how brakes work, how the engine produces motion. That's physiology. Anatomy and physiology are always connected. You can't separate them. Anatomy tells you the structure, physiology tells you the function. Or, in simple words, anatomy is to physiology what geography is to history. Anatomy shows you the place, and physiology tells you what happens there. Example, anatomy gives you the structure of the heart, while physiology explains how the pumping of blood happens. Another example, anatomy gives you structure of the lungs, while exchange of gases is explained by the physiology. Now let's talk about the subdivisions of anatomy. Over the years, the scope of anatomy has grown a lot. It's not just about dissecting anymore. Scientists now study the body using different tools and methods. First one, cadaveric anatomy, which is also called gross anatomy. This is the traditional way of studying anatomy by observing and dissecting dead and preserved bodies, also called cadavers, with a naked eye. It's called gross anatomy because we see large visible structures, not under a microscope. There are two ways to study gross anatomy, regional anatomy, systemic anatomy. Let's talk about regional anatomy. Here, the body or a cadaver is divided into regions like upper limb, lower limb, thorax, abdomen, head, and neck, etc. And we study about those regions, which is called regional anatomy. Whereas in systemic anatomy, the body is divided into systems like skeletal system, muscular system, nervous system, digestive system, etc. And we study system by system in systemic anatomy. Example, if you are learning about all the bones together, that's systemic anatomy. If you are learning everything about just the hand, that's regional anatomy. Now let's talk about living anatomy. This one focus on studying anatomy in a living person. We use methods like inspection, palpitation, percussion, and auscultation, and some modern techniques like endoscopy, X-rays, CT scan, and ultrasound, which helps us to see internal structures in living bodies. Example, when a doctor listens to your heartbeat with a stethoscope or looks at your lungs on an X-ray, that's living anatomy in action. Now let's talk about embryology, which is also called developmental anatomy. This branch studies how a human develops from birth, from a single fertilizer cell to a complete baby. This whole journey from a single fertilizer cell to a complete baby, the study of this whole journey is called embryology or developmental anatomy. The word ontogeny means the development of one individual, and phylogeny means the evolutionary development of the species. Example, how a heart or brain forms in the fetus, that's embryology. Now let's talk about histology, microscopic anatomy. When we study structures under a microscope, like tissues and cells, that's called histology. Example, If you look at skin tissue under a microscope and identify layers like epidermis and dermis, that's histology. Now let's talk about surface anatomy, which is also called topographic anatomy. The surface anatomy is the study of deeper organs and bones in relation to the skin surface. It helps doctors locate structures during physical examination or surgery. So, surface anatomy means learning about inner or deeper structures by observing the outer skin. Okay. Example, feeling the pulse at the wrist. Here, you are actually locating the radial artery under the skin. That's surface anatomy in practice. Now, let's talk about radiographic and imaging anatomy. This is modern anatomy studied with imaging techniques like X rays, ultrasound, CT scan, and MRI. It helps us see bones and organs without cutting open the body. Example, chest X-ray showing the lungs or heart is radiographic anatomy. Now let's talk about comparative anatomy. This branch compares the anatomy of humans with other animals to understand how our body evolved. Example, studying how a human hand and a cat's paw have similar bone arrangements. That's comparative anatomy. Next, physical anthropology. This branch studies the external features, body measurements, and the differences between races or populations. It also includes studying ancient human remains. Example, measuring skull shapes to study evolution. That's physical anthropology. Let's talk about applied anatomy, which is clinical anatomy. This is the most important and practical side of anatomy. It applies anatomical knowledge to medical and surgical practice. Example, knowing the exact location of the appendix before performing surgery. That's applied anatomy. Let's talk about experimental anatomy. This studies how different factors affect body structure or function. Scientists use experiments to understand why certain forms or shapes develop. Example, studying how exercise affects muscle growth. That experimental anatomy. Let's talk about the another subdivision, genetics. This deals with the information stored in our chromosomes and genes that determines how our body forms and functions. Example, when you have your mother's eyes or father's height, genetics explains that. So, in short, anatomy tells us what inside the human body. Physiology tells you how it works. Together, they form the base for understanding all other medical subjects. Because you can't learn pathology, pharmacology, or medicine without first knowing the normal structure and function of the body. In our anatomy subject, we use terms like dorsal, ventral, superior, inferior, etc. instead of common terms like front, back, above, or below. Now, you may get this common question. Why do we even need anatomical terminologies? Can't we just describe things using common words like front, back, above, or below? Well, that's where the problem begins. So, to answer this question, why do we need common terminologies? Let's think about it. Human body is not flat or simple like a drawing. It's a three-dimensional made of hundreds of each placed in a slightly different direction or depth. Now imagine if one doctor says the nerve is behind the bone, another says the nerve is below it, and the third says the nerve is towards the outer side. But everyone is looking from a different angle. It would get really confusing, right? That's why scientists and doctors needed a universal language, a set of fixed terms that mean the same everywhere, whether you are in India, America, or elsewhere. That universal language is called anatomical terminology. It helps us describe body parts clearly, precisely, and without any misunderstanding. Now we have common anatomical terminology, same throughout the world. Now we need a common reference or a standard position. Now you might ask, if everyone is describing parts from their own angle, how do we fix that confusion? Well, we simply agree on one common reference or a standard position for the body, a standard posture that never changes no matter what, and that's called anatomical position. Now let's see anatomical position. In this position, the body stands in a specific way. The person stands upright, faces forward, arms rest by the sides, palms face forward, legs are straight, feet slightly apart, and the toes pointing forward. This is the home position for anatomy, like the default pose of a mannequin in a store. Now, no matter how the body actually moves, we always describe directions as if the person was still in the standard posture. So when we say the heart is in front of the spine, or the thumb is on the lateral side of the hand, everyone in the world knows exactly what that means because we are all describing it from the same fixed reference, that is the anatomical position. Let me ask you a question. If someone stands normally but with the palms facing backwards, are they still in anatomical position? The answer to the question is no, because in anatomical position, the palms must face forward. If palms are facing backwards, that is not the reference position. The reference changes and the description completely becomes inaccurate. In simpler words, anatomical terminologies uses a universal dictionary for describing the body, and the anatomical position uses a universal map to locate every structure. Once we fix the body in that position, we can now talk about planes, directions, and movements without getting confused. Now let's talk about body planes, the imaginary dividing lines. Now that we know the body's standard reference position, let's imagine dividing it into different sections. Why? Because when we talk about anatomy, we often need to describe where something is. For example, is it in the front or back, upper or lower, left or right? To make that easy, we imagine flat, invisible surfaces passing through the body. These are called body planes. They do not actually exist in the body. Those are imaginary lines. They help us describe locations precisely. The first one is sagittal plane. Let's start with the sagittal plane. Imagine a vertical line running from the top of your head down through your nose, chest, and belly button. This line divides your body into left half and a right half. If this imaginary line passes exactly through the center, making two sides equal, it is called medial plane or mid sagittal plane. If it is slightly off to one side, we call it a parasagittal plane. In simpler terms, the sagittal plane separates your left and right sides like drawing a line down your face that splits it into two mirror images. Example, the nose lies on the medial plane. The right arm is on the right side of this plane and the left arm is on the left side. Now let's talk about coronal plane. Imagine a big glass sheet passing vertically through your body from side to side. This divides you into a front part and a back part. That's the coronal plane. It is also called the frontal plane. Everything in front of this plane is called anterior or ventral, which is the front side of the body. And everything behind it is posterior or dorsal, which is the back side of the body. Example, the sternum, which is the breastbone, lies in the anterior part of the body. The spine lies in the posterior part. The heart is in between anterior to the spine and posterior to the sternum. Now let's talk about the transverse plane. Imagine a flat horizontal line cutting across your body like a belt wrapped around your waist. This line divides your body into an upper part and the lower part. The upper part is called superior and the lower part is called inferior. That's the transverse plane. It is also called horizontal plane. It's like slicing the body into top and bottom half. Example, the chest is superior to the abdomen, which means above the abdomen, and the knees are inferior to the hips. The knees are below the hips. The head is superior to the neck, which means the head is above the neck. An important note here is in textbooks, you will often see the transverse plane shown at the level of the abdomen, but that's just one example. In reality, we can imagine a transverse plane anywhere in the body. If we compare the eyes, nose, draw a small horizontal line between them. So eyes are superior, nose is inferior. If we compare the trachea and the heart, draw a line between them. Which is superior and which is inferior? Trachea is superior and heart is inferior. So remember, these planes are not physical lines, but imaginary guides that helps us describe positions in the body. The sagittal plane divides the body left and right. The coronal divides it front and back. and the transverse divides it top and bottom. Once you imagine these planes clearly, describing the locations of any organ or injury becomes much easier. Now let's talk about the directional terms, the language of location. Alright, now that we understand planes, let's learn how to describe where something is in the body. These words are called directional terms and they are like the compass of anatomy, helping us explain how one part of the body is positioned in relation to another. Let's look at the first terms, superior and inferior. Superior and inferior tells us about height or level, what's above and what's below. When we say a part is superior, it means it's above another part. When we say it's inferior, it means it's below. Example, the head is superior to the neck, the stomach is inferior to the heart, the eyes are superior to the nose. Let me ask you a question. If the trachea lies above the heart, what do we call the trachea? Simple. The trachea is superior to the heart. Now let's look at the terms anterior and posterior, which is also called ventral and dorsal. These terms helps us talk about front and back parts of the body. Anterior or ventral means towards the front. Posterior or dorsal means towards the back. Example, the sternum, which is the breastbone, is anterior to the spine. The spine is posterior to the heart. The belly button is anterior to the back muscles. So let me ask you a question. If the sternum is in front of the spine, how do we describe the sternum? It's anterior to the spine. Now let's talk about the terms medial and lateral. These terms tell us how close something is to the midline. You know midline? The imaginary line dividing the body into left and right halves. Medial means closer to the midline, whereas lateral means away from the midline towards the sides. Example, the heart is medial to the lungs. The lungs are lateral to the heart. The big toe is on the medial side of the foot. The little toe is on the lateral side. Let me ask you a question. If the lungs are on either side of the heart, what do we call their position? Simple. The lungs are lateral to the heart. Now let's discuss about the terms proximal and distal. These terms are mainly used for limbs, arms and legs. We know our body is divided into different sections. One such description is the body is divided into upper limbs, lower limbs, trunk, which is also called torso, and the head. Let's focus on the limbs. Proximal and distal are commonly used to describe limbs. They tell us what's closer to or away from the point where the limb joins the body. Proximal means closer to the trunk or the point of attachment. Distal means that away from the trunk or the point of attachment. Example, the elbow is proximal to the wrist. The fingers are distal to the shoulder. The knee is proximal to the ankle. Now let's see each example. Okay, let's see the hand, the upper limbs. This is the point of attachment. Let's see the elbow and the wrist. This is the elbow and this is the wrist. Let's say which is closer to the point of attachment, elbow or wrist. Obviously, it is elbow. So the closest one is called proximal and the far away one is called distal. The same goes for the fingers and the shoulder. See, comparing finger and the shoulder, which is closer to the point of attachment, which is far away from the point of attachment. Simple. The shoulder is closer to the point of attachment. So we call it proximal. And the fingers are far away from the point of attachment, which is distant from the point of attachment. We call it distal. The same goes to the knee. Knee is proximal to the point of attachment of lower limbs, whereas the ankle is distal from the point of attachment. Now let's talk about the terms ipsilateral and contralateral. These words help describe how two structures lie related to each other on the sides of the body. Ipsilateral means on the same side. Contralateral means on the opposite side. Example, the right arm and the right leg are ipsilateral because they are on the same side. The right arm and the left leg are contralateral. Both are in different directions, different sides. The left eye and the left ear are ipsilateral. Let me ask you a question. If a patient has injury to the right arm and the right leg, are those injuries ipsilateral or contralateral? Obviously, it's ipsilateral because both are on the same side. Now let's talk about embryological directional terms. Up until now, we only talk about the adult directional terms. Let's talk about the embryological directional terms. Now, in embryology, which is the study of development of a baby, before birth, we use slightly different words to describe directions because in early stages, the embryo does not stand upright like an adult. The anatomical position is not possible for the baby. So we invent a different directional terms for embryology department. Generally, the baby is curled and the orientation is more like a four-legged animal. So the terms change a little to match the posture. So in embryology, the term ventral means towards the belly side, whereas dorsal means towards the back side. Cranial or rostral means towards the head end, whereas cardial means towards the tail end. Ventral in embryology is like anterior in adults, whereas dorsal is posterior in adults. Just like cranial is like superior and cardial is like inferior. Example, the brain is cranial to the spine and the pelvis is cardial to the stomach. Okay, observe the directions. Let's talk about the terms related to the body movement. Alright, now that we can describe where things are, let's talk about how they move. These terms are used to describe the type or direction of movement happening at joints, especially at synovial joint like the shoulder, knee or elbow. First one, gliding movement. Gliding movement is nothing but when two flat surfaces of balls slide over each other without changing the angle between them. That is called gliding. It's a smooth sliding action. Example, the small bones in your wrist or ankle glide over each other when you move your hand or foot slightly side to side. The better example is our vertebrae column. The bones, they do the same sliding action without changing the angle. That is called gliding movement. Now let's look at the angular movement. These involve increasing or decreasing the angle between two bones. Okay. In gliding movement, we don't see a change in the angle. If we observe a change in the angle, it is called angular movement. There are some terms in the angular movement. First one, flexion, which is nothing but bending a joint, decreases the angle like bending your elbow. Extension, straightening a joint. Here increases the angle like straightening your elbow. This is 180 degrees. Abduction means moving a limb away from the midline, like raising your arm to the sides. Whereas adduction is bringing the limb back towards the midline, like lowering it again. Tip to remember here is abduction means away, adduction means adding back to the body. Let's talk about rotation. When a bone turns around its own axis, that's called rotation. If it turns towards the midline, it is medial rotation. If it turns away, it's lateral rotation. Example, turning your head side to side at the neck is called rotation, whereas rotating your arm inwards or outwards at the shoulder is medial or lateral rotation. When a bone turns around its own axis is called rotation. Okay, there are some special movements in our body we have to discuss. These are unique movements that happen only at a specific joints. Example, what is supination? Turning your palm upwards like holding a soup is called supination. What is pronation? Turning your palm downwards is called pronation. Protraction means moving a part forward like pushing your jaw out. Retraction means retracting, pulling it back. So the final summary is directional terms helps us describe where something is. Embryological terms describe orientation during development and movement terms helps us explain how parts move. Together, these make up the basic anatomical language, which is the foundation for all of anatomy and physiology.